Hi guys, I'm Mike and this is F1 Fanatics. Welcome back to another video here on F1 Fanatics, and today we will be reviewing the first week of testing. Obviously it's been absolutely fantastic to see those 2020 cars out on track for the first time, and the liveries actually in person and on track, they just look so much more better, and it gets your the kind of juices flowing in your mouth, and you're really excited for the kind of season to finally be here. I cannot wait for us to get to Melbourne. It is going to be, I just feel, a brilliant season ahead of us. And so what we will be doing today in today's video, I'll be reviewing day 1, day 2, day 3, showing you the timings, how many laps the guys have done, a couple of speed traps across day 1 and day 2, and also the main highlights, because if you have been living under a rock, you may not have known about Mercedes' new dual axis steering system that has caused plenty of controversy on week 1, but we'll get into that. But I'm just also going to give a shout out. Obviously, this is at the end of the week and a nice roundup, but maybe if you wanted to experience it in a different way, I know the F1 Word is covering all 6 days of testing, morning and afternoon session. We will actually, I will be appearing on that live stream next Thursday with Sean and also Jordan from the F1 Debate Show. The F1 Debate Show themselves do a roundup of testing in a live stream. That will be with Jordan next Friday. I believe they will go live at 5:30 p.m. So that's another way to experience it. Chazza HD, I know he's going doing the afternoon live streaming while it's happening from there, and Aldas and the F1E reviews with Dan, I believe they are giving out at the end of each day a summary of the day. So there's plenty of ways on F1 YouTube for you guys to enjoy the testing coverage. And obviously if you want to not do on YouTube, there is in countries that's available, I believe it's on F1 TV Pro, the testing is on live, and also if you are a Sky customer, I think Sky UK and Sky Italy, you can watch testing in the second week that way. God, that was a load of spill in terms of it, but I hope you guys are still here and still watching and ready for the testing review. So we are going to start off with day 1, and we're now I'm going to put up on screen for you guys the testing timings of the day. This was the first 1-2 for Mercedes of the testing days, with Lewis Hamilton topping the charts with a 1:16.9, Valtteri Bottas with a 1:17.3, Sergio Perez, a lot of talk, we'll talk about them in a minute, Racing Point, with a 1:17.37, Max Verstappen 4th with a 1:17.5, Daniel Kvyat 5th with a 1:17.6, Carlos Sainz with a 1:17.8, Danny Rick 1:17.8, and Esteban Ocon in the Renaults 1:18, pretty much 1:18 flat. George Russell in the Williams got a 1:18.1, Lance Stroll got a 1:18.2, Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari a 1:18.2, Nicholas Latifi a 1:18.3, Robert Kubica in the Alfa Romeo, he was first out. Obviously, with bringing that sponsorship to Alfa Romeo with Orlen, he has to have a certain amount of car time as well, so that's why we saw him there as the reserve driver. Kevin Magnussen a 1:18.4 in the Haas, and Antonio Giovinazzi in 15 with a 1:20.0. So you may be looking at those times and be going, wow, God, Mercedes top again in everything, Ferrari there, well off the pace. Well, in week 1 especially of testing, and especially this week of testing, you can't really take too much for granted, because a lot of the time is they're running simulations, they're seeing how the car runs over the course of the winter. The drivers, the reserve drivers, would have done a lot of work on the simulator. I believe it was an article, either you can get on the F1 app or the F1 website themselves, with Rob Schmedley talking about what the teams do on this testing, what they've been doing this week. And so yeah, they're mainly trying to see whether the data they get on track correlates with the work that they've been doing in the simulator, and they need to make sure that that is matching, because then obviously all the data they get from the track means that, you know, it directly correlates to anything they're working on in the simulator. If the kind of data they're getting is kind of far apart, then obviously, you know, it's going to have to, all the work in the sim is basically useless, because they can't, all the data they've got from there isn't actually translating to real life. So they need to find a way of kind of making sure those things pretty much match up. So they're running kind of low engine modes, high fuel, low fuel, loads of different things, loads of different tyre compounds. So although we'll go through the timings from each of the 3 days, I wouldn't read into those too much or into too much detail on that. We're now going to look at what you probably can take with a little bit more detail, and that is the amount of laps they've done. So I'm just going to put those up on screen for you now. So as you can see, Mercedes topped the day with 173 laps, and Red Bull weren't far behind with 168 laps, and that was all done by Max Verstappen himself. The Mercedes drivers very much have shared. Haas with the least on the day with 106, and Racing Point with 110 as well. But the real positive from this one, there were no red flags throughout the day, and every single team was able to complete over 100 laps, which I think, you know, was a lot more than the previous year of testing. Also going to put up on the screen now is the speed trap, and again, we can't really take too much into this in week 1 because, you know, they weren't really going flat out times, but McLaren did top the speed trap with 329.5 kilometers per hour, and Red Bull was second with 327.3, and Williams were third with 320.2. So yes, you wouldn't really take too much into that. But you do have 3 different engine manufacturers there in terms of Renault, Honda and Mercedes. So that's kind of a look at the data from day 1. In terms of the main talking points from day 1, for me it was the Racing Point that came out on track and looked very similar to last year's Mercedes, and all the talk has been, have they been sharing information? Racing Point themselves have come out and said this was built entirely from scratch, but you know, it pretty much does look like they put like tracing paper over the 2019 Mercedes and just produced their car. There are very distinct similarities between it, but obviously it looks like they're comfortable and confident within the car. They've been near the top of the testing ones in terms of speed throughout, and you know, if it is pretty similar to last year's car, well, obviously that car won the championship, so I imagine even with a year's development that would still probably be a very good baseline for Racing Point to be building on. Max Verstappen came out and said that the Red Bull is fast everywhere, and Red Bull seemed very quietly confident, although on the first day he was certainly pushing it, and he spun a lot on day 1, and it was actually really interesting, probably tyre temperatures and stuff, and the temperature that it was in the afternoon session, but in the last corner, I think 3 from memory, Latifi, Bottas and Kvyat all were a little bit squirrely and struggled to find grip and kind of downforce on the exit going on there when they really pushed and were pushing on the lap. But that pretty much rounds up day 1 of proceedings. Moving on to day 2, and Kimi Raikkonen topped proceedings. I will put the timings up on screen for you now. We had only 13 runners on the second day of testing. Kimi Raikkonen with a 1:17.091. Sergio Perez came second with a 1:17.3. Danny Rick was third with a 1:17.7. Alexander Albon 1:17.9. Pierre Gasly a 1:18.1. Sebastian Vettel a 1:18.1. George Russell a 1:18.2. Charles Leclerc a 1:18.3. Lewis Hamilton a 1:18.3. Lando Norris a 1:18.4. Romain Grosjean a 1:18.49. Esteban Ocon a 1:18.5, and Valtteri Bottas bottom with a 1:19.3. So certainly going through some heavy fuel loads, the Mercedes on that one, because you certainly won't expect to see them down the bottom too much this season. The funny thing with Kimi Raikkonen topping the charts, because after he topped the charts with the speed at the end of the day, deliberately, I was told, ran out of fuel. I don't know if they were seeing how much they could push and how much the reserve limit had in the car to get them in terms of how lightly they could pack the car, but he deliberately ran out of fuel on track right in the kind of last 5 minutes, I believe, of day 2. And yes, brought out the first red flag of testing. Like I said in day 1, it's only testing. We can't take too much from the timings, but again, we're going to look at the number of laps that the teams actually completed. So I'm going to put them back up on screen for you now. So Mercedes again topped the charts with 183 laps between Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas. Renault were the only team not to complete 100 laps. They had their struggles on day 2, really going from there a healthy amount. Romain Grosjean was the only guy out on track and did actually spin late on in the session and crash into the wall, but no serious damage, not bringing a red flag like Kimi did. But 158 for him, so really good data for Haas, and then pretty solid around about the 130s, 140s for everyone else. And looking at the speed trap again, Kimi Raikkonen actually topped it much slower than it was on... Oh, sorry, Mercedes topped it on this one, much slower than it was on day 1, but it was a 324.3 by Mercedes on top. Alfa Romeo were 321.9, and third place was Racing Point with a 317.9, and Haas right down there, right on a low kind of power mode on the engine with a 283.3. That wouldn't be that the engine is so poorly performing for them. The highlight of day 2, and I did mention it at the start, was the thing that got everyone in the paddock talking, an innovation that we haven't really seen probably since like the double diffuser. Obviously, F1 is not a spec series, it is also an engineering series. We don't only see the best drivers, we also see the best engineering minds and what they can do to make cars go faster. And Mercedes have come up with a concept. I don't know how big a difference that it will make, but it is certainly something that could play a part in this year's championship. But it has already been ruled out for 2021, and that is of course the DAS system, and that is the dual axis steering system. Now there are a couple of really good ones who can explain it in a lot better detail than what I can. I'm just a fan, I'm expanding my technical knowledge, but I'm no means an expert on this. So a really good guy to listen to, Marc Priestley on YouTube, has his own YouTube channel. He obviously used to be a mechanic for McLaren back in the Lewis Hamilton time days there. I believe he was also in the garage during the 2008 championship win. And you know, he is fantastic on YouTube for giving a real technical insight and making it really simple. And he really kind of broke this down and made it simple. And Ted Kravitz also did a piece on Sky F1 as well. But basically, what the dual axis steering system does is the wheels naturally in a race car point slightly out, because this only by a small margin, by about 1.5 degrees, and because this helps with cornering and how the car goes. And if it obviously wasn't like this, it would make it more difficult for the drivers to be turning through the corners and be getting the kind of grip and the control that they want. So they have to have this degree of kind of camber pointing out. Now, what the dual axis steering system does is on the straights, the Mercedes drivers, I'm not sure if it's different for the two of them. I think Valtteri Bottas pushes it and Lewis Hamilton pulls it. But we'll use Lewis Hamilton. So basically on the straight, he pulls it maybe by about 2 to 3 inches towards him. And basically what that does is the camber of the tyres from this kind of 1.5 degrees on the front of the car pointing out kind of turns in and straightens up. And basically, yeah, it means that, or maybe even goes a little bit further and points in a little bit. And why are they doing this? Because on the straights, with that kind of 1.5 degrees thing, it causes scrubbing on the tyres. So it kind of gets the tyres really hot, and also can probably lead to a little bit more of tyre degradation, kind of blistering on the tyres. From there. There are noted maybe some aerodynamic things, but this is what Mercedes are pitching is the main benefit of it. So when it goes there, obviously the tyres are more straight aligned, they can go cool from there. There are two kind of different viewpoints on this. Marc believes it is to kind of cool the tyres down, although Mercedes, I believe, last year were one of the best teams at cooling their tyres. Other ones are going, it's to kind of, if they can go a little bit further, create a little bit more tyre temperature to maintain it going into the corners for the next, because on the straights you lose a lot of tyre temperature, and if you lose tyre temperature, that is the kind of grip that means that you have the control in the corner. That is probably the most technical we've ever been on F1 Fanatics channel. Hope you stayed with me. Like I said, I will leave a description to the video of Marc Priestley below, because it was a really fantastic video of explaining not maybe the most complicated system, but it explained it basically in layman's terms and was really easy to understand. And yeah, he's great for kind of technical knowledge on F1 anyway. But like I said, that was the main point from day 2. And obviously I mentioned it a little bit earlier. The first red flag of the session happened with Kimi Raikkonen deliberately running out of fuel and stopping on track. And that pretty much ended day 2 at the end of it. Teams who kind of struggled were probably Renault and Williams. They had some issues, I believe. Russell had an electronics problem that kept him in the garage for a long time in the afternoon, but still managed to rack up a decent amount of laps. And Renault, I think they were really struggling with the setup switching between the two of Ricciardo and Ocon. They seemed to kind of take a lot of time for that. But we now move on to day 3, and putting the timings up on the screen now, I will just run through them for you guys. So, Valtteri Bottas topped with 1:15.7, and now I believe that was quicker than the pole lap that was set last year. Mercedes may have been sandbagging in last year's testing, but they certainly seem very confident in the car that they kind of feel like they don't even have to sandbag this year. Maybe overconfidence, or maybe they just believe in the model that they have. But Lewis Hamilton was second with a 1:16.5. Esteban Ocon third with a 1:17.1. Lance Stroll on the Racing Point with a 1:17.3. Daniel Kvyat in the AlphaTauri 1:17.4. Antonio Giovinazzi with a 1:17.4 as well. Daniel Ricciardo a 1:17.5. Max Verstappen a 1:17.6. Pierre Gasly in the other AlphaTauri a 1:17.7. Alex Albon a 1:18.1. Carlos Sainz a 1:18.2. Roman Grosjean a 1:18.3. Sebastian Vettel a 1:18.3. Lando Norris a 1:18.4. Nicholas Latifi a 1:19.0. And Kevin Magnussen a 1:19.7. And on the last day, there were quite a few red flags actually. I think both Vettel, Ricciardo and Magnussen all brought out red flags during, I think both Vettel and Ricciardo's were in the morning session and Magnussen's was in the afternoon session. No speed trap for today, but we will show you the number of laps up on screen now. So Red Bull were able to complete the highest number of laps there. Renault really got themselves back on track despite kind of little issues with Daniel Ricciardo. 1:65 for them and 1:50 for Alfa Romeo as well. So that was a really good day for Antonio Giovinazzi. Haas really struggled with Kevin Magnussen getting that red flag, crashing out early on. Well, he didn't crash. What happened is the wheel rim broke, punctured his tyre and sent him into the wall, and then the damage was too much that they couldn't repair. And Williams had an engine issue, which meant that they only completed 70 laps. Probably very frustrating with Nicholas Latifi. Could only really get out later on in the day, and it was more kind of pit stop practice on that front. But they were the two teams who struggled and couldn't get really much track time on that final day of week 1 testing. So I kind of mentioned it there. It was the aftermath of DAS in terms of Helmut Marko saying that it should be illegal. Take that with a pinch of salt. But Adrian Newey did kind of say he's not entirely sure that it was legal. Mercedes are convinced that it's a legal system, and the FIA, you know, they said they've been working and the FIA are aware of this. Whether it will be legal come Melbourne or come a couple of rounds into the race will be interesting. I personally quite like seeing innovations within F1, but I don't think you're going to see any other teams copying that system because of it being banned in 2021. It would see a lot of budget to kind of put into for a marginal gain. I don't think it's going to be a huge gain. It certainly would be outlawed if it was a massive gain in that front, I think. So I think you'll see probably just Mercedes using it, and maybe more on kind of longer straight tracks, maybe like Baku, obviously not China anymore, Vietnam with Hanoi, with a kind of similar straight to kind of Baku. You can imagine maybe those where, you know, getting that camber in, it's a long enough straight to do it, is probably might make more of a marginal difference and to tyre life and extending it. But yes, I think Ferrari, it was an engine issue in the end. I'm not sure if it was, I'm pretty sure it was an engine failure, but they took a while to do that. But then obviously Vettel was able to carry on racking up laps later on in the day. Daniel Ricciardo, again, like I said, I think it was a slight issue with the flooring that he had on that day, but it didn't halt him because obviously they were able to, him and Ocon, complete 165 laps, which is the most that they'd done across the 3 days of testing. So it was a very good day for Renault getting things back on track. And Haas, really frustrating day, having a fantastic day with Roman Grosjean the day before. Magnussen, I think Grosjean had gone out in the morning, Magnussen was like itching to go, and yeah, very frustrating for him. That wheel rim broke, causing the puncture, and yeah, caused damage that they couldn't get him back out, or couldn't get him out with any worthwhile time with these sessions to go. So that is a roundup of everything that's happened across the 3 days. I hope it's been enough in detail with you. Obviously, being after the 3 days, I thought, you know, rather than an instant reaction, we'd go into a little bit more detail of what things happen. In terms of timings, do not take anything too literally on this front. More look at the number of laps that they're completing. Nobody kind of really seems struggling at the moment. Haas probably, you would say, have struggled a little bit, did the least amount of laps on day 1, least amount of laps on day 3, and were kind of, you know, above average on day 2, but they're probably lacking behind a little bit in the data there. And Williams, I mean, they've already done better than last year because they've actually turned up to testing. But yes, it's been maybe not the smoothest of runnings over day 2 and day 3 after a very strong day 1. But guys, I hope you've enjoyed that. We will be back again on Saturday 6 PM UK time next week, where I'll be rounding up day 2, and I'm imagining day 2 we will see maybe some more timings. Again, only testing, not going to take them as word of gospel, because obviously Ferrari smashed it last year and we all know what happened when it came round to Melbourne. Mercedes absolutely dominated the season, and Ferrari did struggle. So, you know, don't take it too literally, but there might be some more timings that we can start to maybe put a little bit of a clearer picture of, especially maybe in that midfield of where teams may be placing from there. I don't imagine there will be too much sandbagging, but you're never too sure in those type of things. And shout out, we will be going live, well not live, we will be on the F1 debate show tomorrow at 6 PM UK time, where me and Ash join Jordan and Lyle as we rate the 2020 liveries in a rating out of 10. So guys, make sure you kind of tune in and go for that. But if you're new around here and you like what you see, don't forget you can subscribe to the channel, click that bell notification, and you can keep up to date with all our latest content. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up as well. Lets us know you enjoy what we're doing, and make sure you comment down below on your thoughts from testing so far. Who's impressed you? Who hasn't impressed you? What do you think we can make of the early kind of signs? What do you make of the DAS system? What do you make of what's been called the pink Mercedes in terms of Racing Point? Do you think that's going to really push their development forward? Yeah, it'd be an interesting one to hear from you guys, as always, on that front. But for now, you F1 fans, keep racing!